Fire Emblem has been in a few crossovers, and the representation of the characters in one of those crossovers is so bad that Nintendo fans unironically think that there are 4 Marths. However, this couldn't be further from the truth since Roy actually promotes. But enough about that. How does Fire Emblem represent characters in its own crossover game? First and foremost, remember to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. And I'll mostly be talking about characters with unique skills in the gameplay segment, since talking about how Benny has high defense in Fate and also has high defense in Heroes would not be very interesting. So first, let's start with the characters that are well represented. In Genealogy of the Holy War, Jonkey is a death machine. He has a cost, pursuit, and adept, meaning he could theoretically attack you about 80 times in one round of combat. He also comes with a killer bow, meaning that he probably won't actually need to attack you that many times. However, he's an infantry archer in a Fire Emblem game, meaning that if an enemy unit initiates combat, it won't end well for him. So, how does this translate into Feh? Well, actually quite well. His special weapon, the Bow of Arden, allows him to use specials more frequently, which is the Feh equivalent of critical hits. His weapon also lets him attack twice before the enemy could counterattack if he's faster, which we can infer is the Feh equivalent of Adept, since Luin's weapon also has this effect. This combines his killer bow with his Adept skill. The killer effect synergizes especially well with the Archer exclusive skill Deadeye, which lets him defeat the tankiest enemies in the game, and he has the potential to charge it before the enemy can counter because of the Adept skill. So pretty much, if he initiates combat, the enemy dies. But he has low bulk, so it's good not to overextend. So, he's pretty much 1-to-1 with his Fire Emblem 4 counterpart gameplay-wise. He even has a special default pose that mimics his original art. So we can safely say Jonkey was a great addition to Feh, and represents his original character pretty well. But what about units with a unique skill rather than a bunch of generic skills like Pursuit and Adept? In Fates, every single unit has a unique personal skill. In the case of Perry, her personal skill raises all of her stats for a single turn after she defeats an enemy. This allows her to snowball well if you can use her more than once a turn, through dancing and shelter swapping. This makes her very fun to use if you can figure out how to maximize her potential. While in Feh, she only gets the stat raising effect if she's damaged first. While this effect is not gained in the same way, you still have to work for it, and if she's damaged, it's likely that she already killed an enemy anyway. You can synergize this well with Brazen skills that boost her stats even more if she's damaged. Her weapon also has a cooldown reduction effect, which lets her use Gale Force every turn if she has a Blade skill and can double. However, it's hard to get the effect of the Blade skills to work on her unless she already has her stat boost due to her comparatively lower stats compared to the other cast members. So, like in Fates, you're rewarded for putting the work in that allows her to snowball after certain conditions are met. She can even one-round modern armor units that have weapon triangle advantage over her without a special proc if all of her conditions are met. And trust me, everything else you love about Perry is also included in the game. So, as we've established with the Bandana Man and the Stabbity Stab dispenser,
so I'll get stabbity stab with enemies and you'll thank me. Deal.
Feh is perfectly capable of adapting units from their original appearances. However, they don't always go this route. You may remember Carla from the time you had to recruit her by having her husband fight her to the death and then never deploying her because she's terrible. Well, obviously Fire Emblem Heroes is a gacha game that tries to make money off of selling characters to a fandom that unironically uses the word waifu. So they're not going to add a character that looks like this and then make her terrible. So, they made her faster than Rutger and gave her a weapon that deals true damage. Definitely a far cry from this. So you could say that Carla has poor representation, but at the end of the day she's more fun to use, so you can't really complain about this. A funny thing to note is that a unit in Feh can become better through sheer consequence of the amount of stats they have. Every time they do a round of Choose Your Legends, they increase the base stat total for new units after the winners are added to the game, meaning that the later a unit is added to the game, the better their stats are. To sidetrack for a moment, in Shadow Dragon, Abel is generally considered to be a very good unit as he can quickly grow his lance rank to use effective weapons and has very good growths for that game, allowing him to be an effective unit for the entire journey. On the other hand, Roshea has terrible bases for his join time and has abysmal growths, clocking in at only 10% for speed. It's not uncommon for him to not even survive his joining chapter. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's compare Abel's stats in Feh, who was there since launch, and Roshea, who was added recently. As you can see, Rocher in Fe was clearly blessed by the Lord himself considering how much he was able to get out of that 10% speed growth. So I can safely say neither of these units are well represented since Abel is frankly terrible even with his unique weapon, which is a far cry from his Shadow Dragon self, and if you showed Rocher's stat line to a small Victorian child who also played Shadow Dragon for some reason, their head would explode. Odds are, when Massillon is added in 10 years, he'll have a stat line that allows him to dethrone God himself. Though it's not just stats that matter, presentation can also make an impact. Art can say a lot about a character, and for the most part I think Fe does a very good job with this. I mean, just look at Arthur. The man talks about justice non-stop and is drawn like a comic book character. I can definitely say this art is 100% definitively Arthur, and represents his character quite well. This applies across the board in my opinion, as the art is usually very good, especially Epei's art as he draws all of the buff boys. Have you ever seen such a beautiful face? However, there's also writing to consider when discussing presentation, and I also think they get this right for the most part. In Gonzalez's level 40 conversation, he brings up most of his support partners, and they even get the subtle details right, like calling Trek, Wreck. His voice lines are also acted and written very well. It feels like Gonzalez was plucked right out of Binding Blade when they put him in this game, and I'm a very big fan. However, the characters are sometimes reduced to their basic character traits since they have so few lines of dialogue in Fe compared to the fleshed out supports of the main series. But overall, I'd say in terms of writing, most characters are fully intact. Be warned though, in terms of art, some female characters can have some of their attributes altered to increase marketability. So in the end, I think it's fair to say that a lot of characters are properly represented, be it through their gameplay, art, or writing, and the ones who aren't are usually made more fun to use than in their base game, even if there are disappointing outliers like Rutger. But enough of that silly nonsense, let's discuss the real question here. Who got the biggest glow up in Fe? In Genealogy of the Holy War, Arden is a worthless unit with poor stats, whose only purpose is to get a good item so other units can use it, with a sprite that looks like it was drawn by a 2-year-old, and is often considered to be one of the worst units in the entire franchise. So, how is he in Fe? So, not only was he given god tier art by Epei himself, they gave him his follow-up ring that lets him attack twice regardless of speed, a personal brave sword that boosts his attack and defense, and the highest HP in the game. They also recently added save skills which allow him to cover for his team in combat, so he can share his divine blessings with the rest of the team. You could argue that this is poor representation of the character, but it's so fucking memey that you could argue that this is the best representation possible. With that being said, remember to subscribe and maybe leave a comment on what characters you find have interesting representation in Fe, and maybe watch some of my other videos. I made one about Violence Fan Game just last week, but most importantly, remember to have a nice day. Bye bye.